That's not flying. It's just an illusion.
No way!
Will Wood is an American singer-songwriter and comedian, best known for his work as frontman of Will Wood and the Tapeworms. Described affectionately by fans as dark cabaret or spooky jazz, his genre-defying discography is characterized by hypnotic visuals and clever wordplay, laden with spiritual and psychological allusions. In this video essay, I will analyze how Will Wood uses Buddhist imagery to develop themes in his music, and what his work says more broadly about the perception of Buddhism in the West. To that end, I will focus on the Selfish album, because Buddhist symbolism is so integral to its narrative, as well as rope in songs from other albums to supplement the discussion. And so without further ado, let's get into it.
Can we address the elephant in the building?
There's no better place to begin our analysis than with Destroy to Enjoy, both the first Will Wood song to make reference to Buddhism and the one to do so most intensely. Released in 2015 and remastered in 2020, the song was featured as part of Will Wood and the Tapeworms' first studio album, Everything Is a Lot. The first 2 minutes or so are stock sounds of what is either construction or demolition, which I will spare you from, and just jump straight into the song's singular verse. Let's break it down. On its surface, the song could be interpreted as a face-value, wholesale rejection of the Buddhist soteriological project. In support of this analysis are the actions the we referenced in the lyrics undertake, destroying Buddhist imagery and claiming that the Enlightenment experiences of Buddhist practitioners are of the same level of spiritual significance as getting high on acid or mescaline. In conflict with this analysis, however, is the rest of Will Wood's music. In many of his other songs, he speaks of Buddhism and Eastern philosophy in general very positively, and I wouldn't be making this video otherwise. Therefore, I posit a second theory, which is that the song is a criticism of the commodification and appropriation of Buddhism in the modern West. The we that the song makes reference to is the New Age spiritual movement, enjoying the aesthetics of Buddhism, but in so doing, destroying the long-standing cultural traditions the symbology comes from. These misguided individuals co-opt Eastern religious and philosophical concepts undiscerningly, evidenced by the interchange of Mahayana, Tibetan, and Zen Buddhist terms in this verse, as well as the errant reference to Taoism. In a way, too, the song mirrors koans in the Chan school of Buddhism. Intentionally shocking and vulgar, these ancient sayings were meant to provoke confusion and therefore contemplation in those who heard them. And much like when the Chan monk Linji Yishuan commanded that if you meet the Buddha in the road, kill him, perhaps when Will Wood calls upon the listener to cut down the Bodhi trees and burn the Dalai Lama, he too beseeches us not to be attached even to the teachings or the precepts themselves. But because none of his songs use Chan imagery specifically, I doubt this was purposeful. Rather, I simply find it to be another interesting connection between his work and broader themes in Buddhism.
We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and we'll have our commentator, Carl Phillips, give you a word picture of the scene as soon as he can reach there from prison. In the meantime, we take you to the Hotel Martinet in Brooklyn, where the body of the orchestra are offering performance of dance music. Lord, they're ready to play.
We'll now move on to a discussion of Will Wood's second studio album, Selfish. A central theme of the album is identity, what it means to have a self, when your remembrance of who you are and the world you live in is hazy, and how one can in that circumstance refine themselves and return to who they were before. In public interviews and conversations on the podcast he co hosts with Christopher Dunn, Wood has been open about his struggles with drug addiction and mental illness, which at one point led to him forgetting significant portions of his life and permanently altered his sensory perception of reality. In a sense, the Selfish album is a retrospective on this period in his life, as he tries to put the pieces of himself back together and contend with his past. The album grapples with this experience by using Buddhist concepts as a rhetorical device. For instance, in the song 2012, he makes a connection between enlightenment and the delusions brought on by psychedelics and psychosis, singing,
Originally meant to live a goddamn miracle. It might have been a physical, but I think it was medical.
and repeating the line from Destroy to Enjoy. Both of which state that what he thought to be an enlightenment experience in the moment proved to be part of a mental health crisis. 2012 is significant for being the year Will Wood can no longer remember because of the drugs he was taking at the time, and it'll come up later in our analysis.
I apologize for my meltdown earlier. There's a fair amount of stressors right now. And they take different shapes and they have different names and different faces. A lot of them are people. A lot of them are circumstances. A lot of them are me. This next one, this one should be fun.
Cotard's solution, anatta, dukkha, anicca, extends the role of Buddhism in this narrative further, in joining the three marks of existence with the disorder Cotard syndrome, a delusion in which an individual believes they are already dead, into a metaphor for the anguish of being unable to shed your former self. Although Will Wood can no longer remember being the person he was in 2012, he continues to be haunted by their actions. This reflects the Buddhist understanding of karma and reincarnation. Just as there is continuity of consciousness during this one life, causality links who you are to who you were irrespective of your recollection of being that person. And so, with no idea who he truly is, the narrator of the song Cotard's Solution searches desperately for an identity, only to come up with nothing. As the narrator falls victim to annihilationism, he considers the idea that the answer, the solution referred to in the title, is to end his own life. But remaining in line with the metaphor of the three marks of existence and the metaphor of Cotard's syndrome, the narrator calls this hypothetical act a murder made to look like a suicide, because ultimately he is not himself. The next song in the album, Mr. Capgrass encounters a second-hand vanity, Topomancer's prosopagnosia/pareidolia as a direct result of trauma to the fusiform gyrus, makes only a brief allusion to Buddhism with the verse. Which, by making reference to the Buddhist teaching of anatta, both calls back to the previous track and hints at the Buddhist throughline of the album in a song which is otherwise more focused on medical and psychological terminology. The song with 5 names, aka Soapbox Tau, aka Checkmate Atheist, aka Neospace Government, aka You Can Never Know, represents a shift in the narrator's perspective on his quest for identity. Simultaneously, he acknowledges the impossibility of finding his true self, when there is nothing but void within the form, but also becomes more erratic and insistent that he has to get to the bottom of it. This sentiment is built upon in the next track on the album, and my personal favorite, Hand Me My Shovel, I'm Going In, which...
My heart was stolen by a blind pickpocket in the deep city streets in the summer of 2012, and I never even saw her face. My dreams were shattered like a stained glass window. Jesus in pieces, I believe I threw a brick right through him, but my memory cannot be saved. It just seems unlikely that it's me who was to blame. So I bookmarked my DSM, 'cause I need to remember my place. My soul is crushed like a tall boy underneath the boots and the curb, and I'm still picking up my molars and putting them back in my face. My name was soiled by a last call spill with the black wash wheel, and the blackout killed me sober, running back from a fall from grace.
Okay, admittedly, there's no explicit reference to Buddhism in this one, but I needed to highlight the absolutely scrumptious imagery here. I mean, you know? Anyways, the penultimate song in the Selfish album, Dr. Sunshine is Dead, reiterates the idea of continuity of consciousness as addressed in Cotard's Solution, and the hopelessness in searching for a true self when everything is subject to change. By this point, our narrator has thoroughly shaken off his attachment to the self and his quest to find it. But where does he go from here? The final song in the album, Ish, gives us our answer.
I am a point in time and space, and I am the truths that I create. And so when my matter takes its stand, no, it doesn't matter who I am. No, it doesn't matter who I am. And I'm gonna be
Now, understanding the world beyond the delusion of self, the narrator is free to simply exist. He's discovered that his search for identity was the cause of his suffering and has liberated himself from it, mirroring the Buddhist concept of enlightenment. And thus, the narrative arc of the Selfish album is complete. But how does this album, and Will Wood's music in general, relate to modern Buddhism in a broader context? There's a main point I'll be discussing here, but first, a brief digression. You may have noticed that in Destroy to Enjoy, there was a seemingly out of place line about the Grateful Dead being on tour, and that in 2012, as well as in Suburbia Overture, Greetings from Marybelle Township, Vampire Culture, Love Me Normally, Will Wood makes reference to a Dr. Leary and Ram Dass. These figures are notable for having been prominent members of the 1960s counterculture movement. Dr. Timothy Leary was a disgraced Harvard professor who administered psychoactives to his students and was a major advocate for the medicinal use of LSD and psilocybin. Ram Dass, his former graduate student, went on to become a spiritual leader heavily influenced by Buddhism and is best known for the book Be Here Now. He and Jerry Garcia, lead vocalist of the Grateful Dead, both shared an affinity for entheogens, or psychoactives administered for religious and spiritual purposes. The two were purportedly close, with Ram Dass writing a eulogy for Garcia upon his passing and calling the musician a bodhisattva. There's an entirely separate video worth of lore about these people, but this is a video about Buddhism, not 6 Degrees of Separation from Charles Manson. And so, while not as substantial of a connection to Buddhism as the way the Selfish album is entirely centered around anatta, these references to Leary, Dass, and the Grateful Dead do situate Will Wood's work within the larger picture of Buddhism in the West, so I felt they were worth mentioning. But the main point I want to address with regards to Will Wood's music and modern-day Buddhism is the phenomenon of Buddhist exceptionalism, or the treatment of Buddhism by Westerners as something other than a religion. As a culture, we tend to think it proper to afford religions a certain degree of reverence, even when they're not our own. But because Buddhism is often misunderstood as an agnostic philosophy or diminished only to its practices, we seem to find it more okay to make fun of Buddhism than we probably would other religions. And that's where my analysis of Will Wood's music gets complicated. See, when I discussed Destroy to Enjoy, I conceded that the lyrics could easily be read either as a complete rejection of Buddhism or as a defense of it against appropriation. And it's that ambiguity which makes Will Wood's music such a good case study in how Buddhism is perceived in the modern West. In both interpretations, Buddhism is being hugely disrespected, and very few people, be it within society at large or within the Will Wood fandom, are talking about it. The only part that remains unclear is whether or not Will Wood himself is participating in that derision or was actually speaking out against it. A similar point could be made about the use of no self as a metaphor in the Selfish album, and whether or not the religion was treated with a sufficient level of respect. And while I certainly have opinions as a major fan of Will Wood's music, I can acknowledge that this uncertainty is what makes his music exemplary of how Buddhism is viewed by Westerners. Because even if he had meant to spit in the face of Buddhism when he wrote Destroy to Enjoy, and when he used anatta as a metaphor for drug-induced ego death in the Selfish album, a lot of people just wouldn't have cared that much. And so, if I were to summarize my evaluation of Will Wood's discography, it would be to say that his work has been greatly inspired by Buddhism, and that pieces such as the Selfish album were deeply enriched by its symbology. And while songs such as Destroy to Enjoy and 2012 appear to commentate on Buddhism in the modern West, what Willwood's take on the religion is unclear. Perhaps when or if Willwood releases more music in the future, he'll develop his perspective on Buddhism further, but in the meantime,
I still don't know who.
thank you so much for watching this video and for sitting through however many minutes of me rambling about my favorite musician this ended up being. I really didn't intend for it to be so long, but I hope you enjoyed it, and will maybe even become a fan of Willwood too. But without further ado,
You die, take it away.